This is particularly of interest to me, selfishly. When I'm not doing stuff like this, I work around media and marketing and campaigning for nonprofits. And I've worked with some very niche organizations and some niche causes, from breastfeeding to dying with dignity. So I'm always interested to hear from marketing experts about what they know about very niche audiences and how to reach them. And we're going to talk about senior CALD communities with Professor of Marketing from the University of Tasmania, Stephen de Alessandro, who joins us from down south. And when we had a quick chat when I'm doing my homework for today, Stephen mentioned that there hasn't been a heck of a lot of research on older CALD groups out there, perhaps because they are slightly less attractive or less attractive to marketers and the makers of products out there. And we joked about just before about how when older people are shown in marketing, it's always sort of very Anglo-Celtic, happy, vibrant, active people, often on bicycles, taking a journey and pointing into the middle distance, often with a hat, playing guitar. And that is the way we're portraying that demographic. Now, Stephen knows about what he's talking about. He's a machine, over 120 or so papers published. He's also consulted in the corporate sector to some big companies, ANZ, Challenge Bank, BHP, Telstra, Ford, all of that sort of stuff. And we are absolutely delighted to have him join us from gorgeous Tasmania right now. Stephen, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Brett. Welcome, everyone. As I said, I hope you're all caffeinated, and this has been a really successful conference by the sound of it. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm quite happy to take questions during the talk. That's not a problem at all. Already clarification. So just before I start, I just want to acknowledge country where I am down here in Tasmania. So we acknowledge the Palawa Paka people of La Rita, the traditional owners of the land upon which we live and work. We pay our respects to elders past and present. As the knowledge holders and sharers, we honour their strong culture and knowledge as vital to the self-determination, well-being and resilience of their communities. We stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history. So just a little bit about me and my area. I'm quite elderly, so I'm 58 years old. So I'm moving into an area which, and I come from an ethnic background. So I have an Italian father and a Ukrainian mother. So I'm both Slavic and Latin based. My first and best job was a 10-year-old working as a gardener in an elderly home, some 48 years ago now. And I can tell you that at that time, they were all Anglo-Saxon people. There weren't any people with thick English accents in those days. I am a professor of marketing, and I'm editor of the Journal of Consumer Behaviour, which is a worldwide journal which has some 340,000 downloads last year. I'm interested in consumer behaviour. I've published 114, but that's a bit dated, and it's about 120 and 12 books. My practical interest in this area also comes from that I was a judge for the New South Wales Multicultural Marketing Awards from 2013 to 2019, which was a fantastic government initiative trying to encourage communication, both in health, marketing, government communication. And we examined a number of approaches by community groups, government, and private enterprise to market and communicate ethnically diverse people. I've also worked in the not-for-profit sector as a disability provider, Glenray, in Bathurst, New South Wales. And my professional interest, if you like, is to expand marketing practice to meet the needs of all consumers, regardless of their background, and also to examine the social impact of market decisions. So, sort of in a nutshell. Okay, so just some key statistics about our CALD, or our ethnically diverse population. So last year, the latest statistics, about 30% of our population were born overseas, and this has decreased from down to about slightly from 28.8% in 2020. So that equates to about 7.5 million people rest of Australia who were born overseas. The largest group of overseas people were obviously born in England. However, the Indian group was the largest since 2011. So what we're really seeing now in a change in immigration patterns, if you like, is a change in the tastes and preferences in the Australian market. In 2020, just in case how we think of Australia, we're a very ethnically diverse country. We're in the top by a total number of migrants in the population. Just since the pandemic, there's also been some major changes, and this affects the makeup of the elderly and diverse populations. So England decreased. Those were the next largest group, and Chinese born was the third largest group. Now, the last two also reflect change in the migration program more towards skills-based, business-based migration program, which has picked up those two groups. The Australian population itself also increased during the year due to a high number of births and deaths over the year as well. So this just shows you the population. This is also from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. It's to just give an idea of who our populations from non-English speaking backgrounds are in terms of age. And as you can see here, the top countries with the largest increase, this is outside Australia, outside England and United States, English-speaking countries, is now primarily India. As we can see there, 2021, China, Philippines, and so on. So you can see there's quite a change in the racial mix that we're starting to see in Australia, and that is they're going to eventually going to flow through to changes in the coal and seniors markets. And this is really shown across states as well. There are some differences here, and you can see some of the larger differences are in states of Western Australia, followed by, to some extent, New South Wales as well. So there's some changes also within Australia. So which countries then, which backgrounds of people are aging faster than the Australian population? And if we have a look at this, we can see that from our previous migration patterns in the, I guess from the 50s or late 40s through to present, we can see that people from Greece, Italy, Germany, Vietnam, surprisingly, that's the big group that came here in the 1970s. If we add up Hong Kong and China, if we consider them as one country, that would obviously put them in a larger group. We can separate out China and Hong Kong also because of the different language groups. So Chinese people primarily Mandarin speakers, Hong Kong primarily Cantonese speakers. So they're quite distinct ethnic groups just on the basis of language. So if we're starting to think about who these groups are, we would say that we can see there's Southern European here, Chinese. Why the German population is aging, that's not really a large part of our population that we're looking at here. And certainly China, and we would expect in the future to see a larger group of aging people from the Indian subcontinent in there as well. Okay. So, as I said, there's not a lot of research that's being published in this area, and so I'll guide you through just some of the important findings. And again, I'm happy to share these slides with anybody who's interested after this paper. And so just looking at elderly and ethnically diverse people, some of the conclusions mirror some of the conclusions we see in marketing to elderly people. And personal direct forms of marketing, that is face-to-face, the old-fashioned going to a counter, wanting to go to a bank teller, are more preferred by these people. And you could see that would make sense, particularly given that there may be varying levels of education, technical use of technology. And so it's much easier if you find somebody from an ethnically background to converse with them. And certainly in my experience of living and working in Sydney, there were various banks and tellers that were set up Primarily, I saw them for the Chinese market. Opinion leaders are very important for this group, as they are for others. So community groups. So Italian Greeks, there's obviously strong extended family groups as well. And the third point is it's not just about language. Often we think that marketing to people with linguistic backgrounds is simply just changing or translating the language. It's actually also having the cultural competence to understand taboos, rituals such as greeting, food, marriage, death, these kinds of things, and how they're portrayed. We already see that with the way financial institutions now market themselves around Chinese New Year. And so that must be defined in terms of actual actions rather than promises. We'll have a look at some examples of where we've got this right and got this wrong. In terms of doing research with these people, if you want to find out about them, there are also a few guidelines. You need people from this background, ideally, to research them. So they've got to be familiar not only with the language, but the verbal and non-verbal nuances of the culture of the target population. So Italians are very expressive, for example. Chinese, much more, as a rule, are much more reserved. And so how you might question them would be completely different. We found, and this is a very important aspect in when I was looking at the Multicultural Marketing Awards, that the target population should be involved in the planning process of any research, including focus groups. So ideally using ethnic agencies or somebody from that background. So that relates to the third point there. Focus groups, and I'm talking about focus groups because they're often used in this area here, should be conducted in familiar facilities and trusted neighbourhoods. So you try and have them where these groups actually live and work if you can. Rapport with seniors is important. You don't just walk in and ask questions. It may be a much longer period of time because the social connection means much more to these people than it might to other consumers. Consent forms, they've got to be easy to read, understand in large font. They've got to be written in plain English, printed. Don't use complicated scales and elaborate multiple choice questions or long surveys. They should really be avoided when you're doing research in this area. So really there's a focus more on qualitative in-depth interviews and focus groups when you're doing research in this area. Some other factors to consider, obviously, levels of English literacy will change. Now, even amongst the Italian Greek populations there, we would all have neighbours or relatives who've lived in Australia for long periods of time with low levels of literacy. They just haven't needed to. Also be careful that if you have a complicated research approach, you actually might be demeaning somebody because they lack of English profession. So the pre-testing and translating and back-translating of any sort of messaging is crucial. The old-fashioned telephone, using telephone reminders, both in health messaging, rather than sending people texts or emailing, might be as particularly useful in this area. They versus us in decision-making. So in many of these elderly groups, decisions as they get older are made increasingly by the family group, not by them. So you may be dealing with an extended decision-making group. Also that there is the issue of how they are perceived within their ethnic group, and so the social impacts might be important. Some of the other suggestions or care to be taken with is that ethnically diverse and elder consumers collectively, so if you don't really have the clear understanding of English and your cognitive processing probably is not as sharp as it used to be, then it's quite possible you could make bad investment decisions. So there's a real importance for anybody doing financial services in this area to take extra care and advice. Okay? Any questions so far? All right, well, let's have a look at some examples which I think are good, and I'll have a look at one which is related to the current election, which I think is particularly bad. But it's being done by both sides, so it's apolitical. All right. So here's an advertisement for Lego's pasta sauce that's been around for quite some time. And this is a grandmother or Nonya in the kitchen. So I like that advertisement for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's an empowering ad. She's very active. She's enjoying life. Although it's a pre-cooked sauce, she adds something to it. And it's bringing the ritual of cooking as well. And so I think there's a lot of levels why this brand, I think, has been very successful for this ethnic group. And there's a whole series of advertisements. So not only do they advertise to Anglo-Australians, but also to Italians. So I think that's a very good example of ethnic approaches here. I notice I've got a few chats here. Yep, right. I think everyone, I'm not sure if anyone, I'll come back to the chats there. I can't hear anybody, but
Can you hear me, Stephen?
Oh, okay, good. All right, good. Now, if a marketer can't do the ethnic marketing for you, then what you can do as a new Australian is to do your own marketing. And perhaps one of the most successful examples of this is Franco Kotso. Those of you who are probably not from Victoria, probably not familiar with this guy, but he's still around. He's been around since the 1960s, I think. And he runs a whole series of advertisements around his furniture store, usually late at night, but across a number of ethnic languages. And I guess he's true to his original approach.
Grandsire, where in Brunswick and Footscray, Franco Kotso have the pleasure to present to you Il Modernissimo bedroom suites, dining room, and wonderful range. Why don't you come for yourself and have a look at this magnifico Il Modernissimo, only can be found from Franco Kotso. Buy from Franco Kotso. Megalo, Sepulitas for Franco Kotso. Trapezeria, κρεβατοκάμερες, σαλόνια, καρέκλες από το Franco Kotso. Ελάτε να αγοράσετε έπιπλα στο Franco Kotso. In Brunswick and Footscray. Να αγοράσετε στο Franco Kotso. Franco Kotso per la prima volta in Australia. Dichiara guerra, guerra e pezzi, grande svendita. Dove? A Brunswick e Footscray. Se i migliori mobili volete comprare, oggi, domani e sempre, da Franco Kotso dovete andare. Dove? A Brunswick and Footscray.
Yeah, I hear what you say. It's a shame that Italians are only depicted in the same way. I guess I'm looking at elderly Australians here. And in this example, in the Franco Kotso one, I think it's very clever. He starts off in English, he goes into Italian, he goes into Greek, and then he goes back to Italian. The type of furniture he's selling, by the way, wouldn't necessarily appeal to mainstream Italians. So it really, mainstream Australians rather. So it is really appealing to that market. So that's the way he's depicted himself. The Legos advertisement, there are more than one. I've just showed you an elderly couple. So there's more, if you like, contemporary versions of this product around. But yeah, it is a shame that we haven't got more depictions of how diverse the group is. So I agree with that, Lisa. More work needs to be done in advertising. Well, okay, so now I do want to talk to you about some poor examples, and this is one I think which both sides, both political parties, I think are guilty of here. And this is marketing to Chinese Australians trying to get their vote. And you can see on the right here, we've got a coalition run, which has Vote Labor, and it has the Chinese Premier there putting up a vote. And then we have a Labor Party approach as well, which is also saying don't vote, associating the Communist Party with the Liberal Party. Now, why do I think these are both bad? Well, because elderly Chinese people would have a good experience, would know people who went through the Cultural Revolution. They probably immigrated to get away from that kind of approach. So this is really bad marketing, in my opinion, to be using this approach in this election. So it's something to be very careful about. And I think there's been quite a backlash in the Chinese community against being somehow connected with these political choices that people are making here. All right? So we don't always get it right. And certainly, here's some better examples. This is one I really like here. I don't know how well you can see. This is FedEx Australia, the link between China and Australia. I really like that advertisement. Then we've got some great examples here of Chinese media itself. And just look at the distribution of the sales that they have. So 250,000 for the Australian Chinese Age. I think that's amazing.
Terry Basami.
Oh, sorry. And so yeah, so that's that. So I think there are some good examples here, and I think what this shows you, if you are going to market in this space, you really do need to use specialized ethnic marketing agencies. Okay. So there's some of the references I covered in today. As I said, not a huge lot of research. A lot of research either looks at elderly people, younger people, and as I was talking to Brett earlier, there is a real obsession in marketing often to be concerned with or market to younger people. And that's a bit of a shame because some of these groups are actually quite wealthy and quite capable of making important decisions. So I think there's a bit of a lost opportunity there as well. So thank you for your time. Happy to take questions.
Excellent, Stephen. Well, I'm happy to ask them. Let's throw straight away to Mona, who asked, grazie tanto, Stephen. Indeed, the target group must be involved. This is unfortunately not happening enough across the board regarding the whole aging population. Ageism, stereotypes are divisive. How do you suggest we can combat this perception of older people and that they are no longer valuable to the community? So that's not looking at ethnicity specifically, but we've mentioned earlier today too with Dr. Norman Swan, I think someone used the phrase rampant ageism, and I agree with that for what it's worth. Any thoughts on how to combat it?
So thanks, Brett. What we noticed with really successful marketing in the New South Wales Multicultural Marketing Awards was they tended to employ people from ethnically diverse backgrounds who use specialist agencies. So that's step one. Step two, the research would involve, I know this sounds really basic, the research would involve in-depth in the concept planning and development and execution, people from that market. So they would go and work with them, develop particularly health promotion programs. So what often will happen is that government, this tends interesting to happen with large organisations and government departments. It's getting better, is they'll just translate it and say there it's in Italian, there it's in Chinese, without missing the nuances and how you would approach and market to those people. So we tended to find that community groups, people with not much money, marketed better to their communities because they knew them, they involved them than these larger companies do. SBS, of course, being the main exception there.
And Stephen, that doesn't mean, of course, that. Let me put it this way: what I find with niche groups is the people that might be called upon to offer their insights into their own group aren't always necessarily representative of the group at large. I mean, you can take that for, voters in an electorate. You can speak to one bunch of people and get a sense of the electorate that might not be broadly held. And I do find the more niche the audience, the less representative those spokespeople might be. Any thoughts on that?
So use a combination of approaches. So you might need to use focus groups. People in different states are quite different. don't assume that someone's Chinese speaking, that they are Mandarin speak. They could be Mandarin. They could be a Cantonese speaker, quite different. Even in China, I mean, it's a huge country. There are different ethnic groups within the Han group. So it goes back to even the region that people come from. It's the same with Italians. You know, the north is quite different to the south. You can't just... So you try and get representation if you can. And the way you do that is talking to the community, making sure you've got representation of the community. If you're doing health and social marketing programs, then you really might think about having a steering committee and dealing with that. If you're still not sure, talk to your local state Department of Ethnic Affairs. The one in New South Wales is excellent. And I'm always surprised how few people approach this department. SBS provide a lot of good services in this area as well. So my advice is to try and contact a number, if you can, of groups to capture differences across various age groups as well. Because the different age groups will respond differently as well. Yeah.
Bianca asks, the CALD market is fragmented by diversity and also age.
Yeah.
How would you advise engaging with different age groups, older versus middle-aged CALD members? And that rings true to me. I mean, my parents, father's departed sadly, but mum's 83, Dutch burger Sri Lankans. And that was a wave of migration in the 60s, very different to the waves of Sri Lankan immigration that came to Australia since. You know, so one era might be very different mindset, education, language than the other. How can we combat that, Stephen?
It's hard, isn't it? I think it depends, obviously depends on what you're trying to do with these people. Is it financial products? Are they educational services? Are you looking at nursing homes? Are you looking at holidays? So I think in terms of what you're doing, it depends on how far you want to drill down and customize what you're providing. If that is important, then it's worth doing the extra research to customize that. So you might do that with financial products and services. Maybe well worth your while doing that. For some, it might be a bit harder to do that. Tourism services might be an example here. Nursing homes, I think it's a real challenge in this space because nursing homes are struggling at the moment, retirement homes, just with the general population. So how then do you then deal with some of these issues here? Very difficult. I think there you may need to cut your cloth, so to speak, to look at some generalities across these specific age groups or language groups if you can. Can't market to it. Ideally, we'd market to everybody individually, but somewhere it becomes harder. Now, you can use social media in some instances, although elderly people's use of social media is quite different. It's not the way we would use it. It's more to keep in contact with extended family groups. So it's quite different how they use it. And of course, there's different levels of technological penetration and acceptance there. So to answer the question, no easy solution.
No, okay. There isn't. And there has to be enough will. There has to be something worth doing all that work to get, you know, and often that falls into the strictly commercial world. By the way, if people wonder about that furniture salesman you saw, he is a Melbourne icon, Franco Kotso, and there is a documentary that's just been released about him that gives you an insight into him. And he was certainly very much in control of his image and his life, and he's still doing it in 2022, just. By the way, Stephen, you showed the Legos ad. One ad, and I'm not the target market, that I often compliment from the couch when I see it in terms of its, I think, understanding of its audience, is an ad for the NAB. And of course, they have endless resources. It's a gorgeous ad. It's voiced by a young girl who's very cute. And she's, I think, in Sydney, although they don't make that obvious. And she's living somewhere quite inner urban, and she's in a flat, not a house with a picket fence and a yard and a golden retriever. And she's waiting at the window for her mother to return home. And she's talking about what is the value of money? what does money mean to you? And she's very cute and it's quite philosophical. And we see all the people in the neighborhood walking past, the kids with the football, which is sponsored by NAB, the small business opening up for the day. And then her mother walks in and she's in scrubs and she's either medical, nurse, doctor, or maybe nursing home. But it just shows to me an understanding of perhaps the position of family in that community, the importance on financial security, and the realities of a fairly recently establishing community. Are you familiar with that ad?
Not that ad, but I get the idea of what they're trying to do. So the social connected. So one of the big problems with elderly people is they don't become socially connected anymore. We tend to lose. We don't in our society, unlike the Italian society or Chinese society, we don't tend to value elderly people as much. In Italy, they're called zia. Zia Stio d'Alessandro. Basically, that means, a really important person. And that's just because your age. Now, so any advertisement which does that is reinforcing that emotional need for an elderly person or somebody older to be connected with the next generation. So that's so it's not just an either or kind of advertising that's important here. You can market
Stephen,
both.
I can talk marketing for all afternoon and you would have to literally cancel your 4 o'clock, but we've got another session. I can see them in the green room. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Thanks for having me and good luck to everyone.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen Alessandro from the University of Tasmania, where he is the Professor of Marketing.